Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. Viewers, US President Donald Trump completed his over 1 hour address at the World Economic Forum in Davos. A speech marked with sharp warnings, tough talk with allies, and a clear message of America first. From Greenland to Europe, Trump pulled no punches, reigniting debates over US leadership and the future of transatlantic ties. President Trump called for immediate negotiations to acquire Greenland, claiming only the US can secure it, but said force won't be used. His remarks at Davos sparked opposition from Europe, Canada, and NATO, who urged diplomacy and warned of a crisis in relations.
We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. And I want to discuss how we have achieved this economic miracle, how we intend to raise living standards for our citizens to levels never seen before, and perhaps how you too and the places where you come from can do much better by following what we're doing, because certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore. They're not recognizable. And I love Europe, and I want to see Europe go good, but it's not heading in the right direction.
Well, now Trump has also slammed NATO ally Denmark as being ungrateful for United States' help with securing Greenland after World War II. He also doubled down on his claims over the strategic Arctic island. But both Europe and Canada have closed ranks against what they view as a threat to the US-led global order. Let me quickly take you through Trump's sharpest attacks. Well, very clearly he has come out to say, as far as Europe is concerned, that it's not headed in the right direction. On Greenland, he says no one can secure Greenland other than the US. On NATO, he said that US is treated very badly by the NATO. Agree to Greenland demand or we'll remember. He also says on Russia and Ukraine that Putin wouldn't have started it if I was there. On Venezuela, he said they'll make more money in 6 months than in the last 20 years. On Canada, he says we gave them freebies. They must be grateful. On Macron, he has said that I told him that I'm putting a 25% tariff and 100% on wine, and that's how the pharmaceutical prices were raised, is what Trump says. Listen in.
So we want a piece of ice for world protection, and they won't give it. We've never asked for anything else, and we could have kept that piece of land, and we didn't. So they have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember. They'll be making more money than they've made in a long time. Venezuela is going to do fantastically well. We appreciate all of the cooperation we've been giving. We've been giving great cooperation. Once the attack ended, and they said, let's make a deal. More people should do that. But Venezuela is going to make more money in the next 6 months than they've made in the last 20 years.
Viewers, if you thought that Trump's takeover obsession will end with Venezuela and Greenland, then you're wrong. Donald Trump has now set sights on a new target, the Chagos Archipelago in the Indian Ocean, where he's criticized ally United Kingdom over a deal that would give Mauritius ownership of the archipelago, which comprises over 60 islands. His concern centers on the chain's largest island, Diego Garcia, which hosts the well-known joint British-American military base. Let's quickly take this across to my colleague Mihir Bhatt, Managing Editor and Chief Business Officer, who's joining us at the moment. Mihir, at Davos, Trump has not pulled any punches. He has said that there won't be any kind of military action on Greenland, but at the same time has very clearly told EU that US has got nothing out of NATO for the last several decades, and this is something they should very, very seriously consider.
Absolutely, Madhav. In fact, if you look at his speech, he was quite dismissive of the way Europe is operating right now. And he ended up saying that I don't want to say it, but they are looking quite bad and they don't know what they are doing and they don't know where they are going. I think the biggest takeaway was when he said, and we spoke to a lot of experts after his speech, the biggest takeaway is while right now he's saying he'll not use force, but he also said that we will remember. And he in fact called the then US administration foolish to hand over Greenland back to Denmark after the end of Second World War. He also said that US has always been there for NATO, but he is not sure if NATO will be there. If you have to summarize his speech, I think what he meant was that, you know, it's my way or highway, and United States is the only stabilizing force in the world. And if you don't align with United States, then you have a problem. He also said that when US goes up, the whole world goes up. When US goes down, the whole world goes down. He also used the word stupid quite a few times in his speech, including for Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky. But he did say that I want to negotiate, I will negotiate. But he didn't pull any punches, like you rightly said. So this is not the end of the story. I think this is just the beginning. And with fault line even further widening after today's speech between Europe and US, it remains to be seen how it plays out going forward.
Absolutely. And in fact, he is there. He has other engagements through the rest of the day as well there in Davos. Here, take us through how long Trump is expected to be there, because, you know, the statements that he's made, he's not spared the EU countries. He's, of course, talked about Denmark. He's even referred to Switzerland in his speech, all of the time being present within Switzerland and therefore within the EU.
Right. So, Madhav, actually, he's because it's 250th year of U.S. independence. So there's an old church, which is a very iconic property in the Davos, that has been taken over by U.S. government and converted into the U.S. pavilion. So it was expected that he will visit it. So far, he hasn't, but he may just end up going there. He did mention that today, later in the evening, he will be meeting Mr. Zelensky. In fact, Mr. Zelensky was supposed to speak at World Economic Forum, but that was dropped. But he is meeting Mr. Zelensky, is what he mentioned. And obviously, some of the European leaders have reached out to him, and he did say that he's going to meet them. But there was no specific, you know, details given that where and what time the meeting is taking place. But he's definitely, the way I look at it, and that's the buzzword here at World Economic Forum, that this is actually the last opportunity that Europe has to bridge the gap between United States and European Union. If you heard his speech, he in fact also mentioned that Canada is United States. So, you know, his speech remains bellicose, and obviously what he meant was that it's my way or highway. So while there are a lot of engagements, there has not been any formal structural communication from the United States government in terms of how many bilaterals he's doing today.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Mayor, with that ground report from Davos. And of course, all eyes on what Trump has to further say while he's present there at Davos. Thanks so much for joining us indeed. Quickly opening this up to our guest now.
You're watching the News Hour at 10. Debate number 1 on Times Now. Super Prime Time.
All right, and with us is Ashok Sajanar, former diplomat. We also have Kushal Mehra, author and podcaster, joining us. Dr. Bruno Macias is a writer and former Portuguese Secretary of State for European Affairs. Ina Tangent, senior fellow of the Taipei Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives, is with us. Also joining us at the moment is Malik Abdul, GOP strategist. We have Sierra Claire, foreign policy analyst, joining us. But my first question is to Dr. Dave Bratt, who's a former member of the U.S. Congress. Dr. Dave Bratt, what we're looking at in terms of Greenland, despite the whole, you know, the kind of rhetoric that we've seen over the last few days. Now, once again, Trump reminding EU that it was us who, you know, freed Greenland from the clutches of the Germans during World War II, and we gave it to Denmark. And now saying that the EU has done nothing much for NATO. We expect it to be given in return. That's not a very easy task, going by the kind of statements that we've seen coming out of the EU so far.
Yeah, no, that's right. And, you know, I don't think he wants to get into the strategic, you know, geopolitics detail. But, you know, just a brief cursory look, the nuclear bastion strategy, Russia bases approximately 2/3 of its second strike nuclear capacity in the Kola Peninsula. nuclear-armed submarines, Northern Fleet, which must transit the GIUK gap, Greenland Ice and UK gap, and I could go on and on and on. And so with the ice caps melting in the north, Russia and China have been holding joint military exercises, submarine ships, bombers in the Alaska region. China is saying, hey, we just want to position ourselves for the rare earth minerals up there, using kind of calming language. We just want a footprint there. And I think that's the major consideration here. And so President Trump is saying, look, we haven't asked for anything. Denmark, Europe is getting weaker instead of stronger, 0% economic growth in England. Right now, Germany, France, Denmark, and he, so that he's making a tough ask. He said we're not going to use force, but he is showing we're not going to compromise on this either because they cannot defend it, and that's the major issue. Europe is weak right now. Denmark has no ability to defend Greenland. And so I think that is the crux of the debate right now.
All right. Dr. Bruno's smiling there. Dr. Bruno, would you like to take that question? The whole fact that Denmark is in no position to defend Greenland, and that's where the U.S. has to necessarily come in to secure the strategic interest of EU as well as U.S. when it comes to NATO and the Greenland.
Let me be very blunt. What this reminds me of is those excuses and pretexts that Vladimir Putin used in 2021 and 2022 before invading Ukraine. That's exactly what it sounds like. No one in Europe takes these ideas seriously. Everyone knows this is about territorial expansion. This is about the resources, the natural resources of Greenland. This is about Donald Trump's personal vanity. This is about the fact that Donald Trump is approaching the end of his life and he wants to go down in history as a president that expanded the American territory like the four presidents or three of the four presidents on Mount Rushmore. And this cannot be accepted. I can tell you that no one in Europe is going to accept this. No one is going to sell Greenland. And if the U.S. decides to invade, we'll be there to defend it.
That's an interesting point of view. But Sierra Claire, the larger question that many have is that, is Donald Trump doing all this just to build up hype? We talked about how, various U.S. strategic assets are going to be moving towards Greenland. Those were the reports coming in about 48 hours ago. And now he says we won't strike. So this is ultimately just about showmanship. It's just about trying to show a lot of bluster is what people are saying.
Well, I think he prefers to buy it.
Sierra Claire, please. Question for Sierra Claire, please.
Yes. Well, I would say that, if we look at this whole thing that's been going on with Greenland, this actually goes back to President Trump's first term, that he's been bringing this up and making offers about this, financial offers. And so you have to look at Denmark has had a chance. We've given them a chance. We've said, can you build up? Can NATO build this up? That's been something President Trump has worked on a lot in this current term. And they had sled dogs there. I mean, that's what they had sent there to defend Greenland, was a team of sled dogs. So, we have to, at some point, you have to put your foot down and say, you've been given the chance. You're not defending this. China is moving in. Russia is moving in. And we are going to do something about it. And I think that that's Trump's message when he sends, these shows of force or whatever. It's not meant to be a message of aggression towards Europe. It's meant to be a message of, this is time to do something about this. Your time is up, and you haven't been able to adequately do your job. So now we're coming in to do your job.
But it's also about sovereignty, Sarah Claire. You can't just waltz into another country. It's not a piece of property that you can just pay some money and buy off. There's sovereignty of Denmark at stake over here. And following Venezuela, where you say that there was a dictatorship that was replaced and there were concerns of sovereignty there as well, you can't just waltz into any part of the world that you want and take over that land.
Well, that's true. And I think that President Trump has shown that he respects sovereignty by, especially with the Venezuela, by working with the actual Venezuelan elected representative, that this isn't, a time of the past where in the past America has gone in and thought that we knew better than the locals. And that's actually, he's taking advisement and working with the actual Venezuelan locals there. And it's the same thing with Greenland, is he has shown sovereignty, respect for sovereignty by coming to Denmark and saying, we want to buy this from you, and actually going to the people of Greenland and giving them the offer. And that's something that still needs to be decided, that they need to have a referendum, because there's a lot of people in Greenland who support.
That's ultimately what the people, that's for the people of Greenland to decide whether they need to have a referendum or not. But I'm going to bring in Ina tangent, because this question of China and Russia moving in repeatedly comes up in the context of Greenland. And the United States says that we need to secure that particular island in the Arctic area because of our own strategic interests. We don't know whether Russia and China are going to start moving in. Already we've seen sort of patrols, etc., take place over there. We want to secure our long-term interests and that of NATO. Ina Tangent, how do you respond to that?
Well, the two things. First off, Greenland is part of Denmark, and it is covered by Article 5. So if any country, regardless of who it was to go in there, there's a mutual defense pact, Article 5. The second point I would put out there is that the United States does have a base there, and they're entitled to have more bases and to have as many troops as they want. Now, you'll notice during his speech, he talked a lot about, well, I don't want to defend something I'm leasing. I feel better if I own it. But that's sovereignty. I think that's your point. I reject the two analysis of the Americans who said that somehow Donald Trump is thinking about others. He doesn't think about others. He thinks only about himself and his glory. I agree with my European counterpart. This is just a sad display of somebody whose ego cannot be tamed. Here's somebody who rambled on for 45 minutes before cutting to the chase and talking about it. The Europeans are not interested in his supposed victories in America. Why would he be talking about them and wasting people's time? So this was not the best performance by an American president. He certainly didn't mention India or the things that he's done to India in terms of both the leadership and the country, color revolutions, interference in the elected process, and just, literally saying things that aren't true, that he somehow settled a dispute that was going on between Pakistan and India. This is hurtful. It's just like the other things he said, calling other leaders stupid and they better watch out and, they have to do as I tell them. This is not a kind president. This is a deranged individual who thinks that he's on top of the world.
Okay. Deranged individual or not, and we'll let our guests come in on that. But Dr. Dave Brad, take that question. At the end of the day, US has its bases over there. It can very well defend itself, even if it wants, all sorts of radars and sensors to advance one about missiles coming in, what have you. You have the ability to expand your military footprint over there. Why would you then want to take over a country by force? Because that's nothing but naked imperialism is what many are expressing.
Many can express that, but the comments are a little hyper-personal. And they show an ignorance of our major geopolitical strategy right now. This is not Trump's personality on a given day. This is our major national security document, our national security strategy, which is called hemispheric dominance. And it's been laid out by the Secretary of War, by President Trump, the head of the State Department, Rubio. So this isn't some haphazard strategy. What I think President Trump cannot believe is the European attitude, the trillions, right? We're over $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion to defend NATO and Europe, right? We've done all the funding on the Ukraine war. We could go into that detail later. I'm not for that. The U.S. citizens want a $300 billion audit of that because there's a lot of corruption over there. Out of our taxpayer dollars. And We can't get that because of the corruption over in Ukraine. And so I could go on and on there and say it's not personal. This is a major strategic, important asset for the United States. Just go look at a map. People may not know that, yeah, it's new, right? The State Department, we need to go on an education offensive showing where this is, what the Russians are already doing, and now what the Chinese are doing. And that's why I think President Trump just scratched his head like, do you guys know what's going on here? China's all over the world, right? And then the idea that Europe, Carney in Canada is going to go make deals. China doesn't know what human rights are. Right? That's going to be your strategic partner with shared values, right? That's the new in word by all these elites, the shared values with China.
Dr. Dave Brad, that does not mean you start disrespecting the sovereignty of other countries too. If China does that,
yes,
do two wrongs make a right.
About shared values. What do you mean by shared values?
No, I don't accept the premise. We're not saying that. President Trump said very clearly that he's not attacking.
I think Bruno wants to respond to you. Dr. Bruno wants to give you a
sovereignty argument.
Okay, I think Dr. Bruno wants to come in on that. I'm going to allow him to come in and then you can respond. Dr. Bruno.
What you mean by shared values is invading and occupying a sovereign democratic country. The premier of Greenland the other day, just 3 or 4 days ago, went public about conversations he's having with his young kids. And his young kids cannot sleep and ask his father if they have to leave Greenland because America is about to invade. Today, Trump said if he invades, he will invade with devastating force, terrifying and terrorizing the population of Greenland. 60,000 people, good people, simple people, hardworking people. This is the people you are terrorizing, and you come and talk about common values, not common with me, not common with Jörg for sure. And second point, U.S. already is defending Greenland. Greenland is part of NATO. It's not part of the EU, but it's part of NATO. It's defended by the United States. The U.S. used to have 15,000 troops in Greenland, 6 bases. For budget constraints, budget reduction imperatives, it reduced the troops' presence to 150. And now it has the gall to say that Greenland is not being defended. There are no dog sleds. That's a joke by President Trump. It's one thing that sort of puzzles me about the American debate now is that Trump makes a joke and then his followers take the joke literally. There are no dog sleds. There are Danish special force troops and European special force troops. And if you want to have American special force troops, you're welcome to, but not to invade and to terrorize the local population.
Okay. All right. I'd like to bring in fact, Malik Abdul to respond to that. Malik Abdul, you can't do this by terrorizing other people. There's a way to go about this, and this is certainly not the way. And you can't buy sovereignty in the market.
Well, as we've been talking about, the president made it clear that he has no intention on invading Greenland. There will be no military force to actually take Greenland, and that's something that we can take off the table. This was a concern going into the speech, but the president made absolutely clear that it's literally not on the table. So I understand the fear and doom, the fear and gloom of our European allies, but the Americans don't take very kindly to being lectured by any of the European members as far as what is America's strategic interest. This is something that Donald Trump, and has been pointed out, Donald Trump, this is something that he talked about in his first administration, but this concern about Russia, China, the influence that they have in the Western Hemisphere, whether that's what recently happened in Venezuela, even looking at the recent goings and force down in the Panama Canal. This is something that Donald Trump has specifically been interested in, and he's going to go about it in a way that I do believe that he has to be very diplomatic. I don't believe that this idea that he should be terrorizing or even threatening our NATO allies, I don't think that that's a feasible thing. And polls here in the United States have shown that the American people are not in favor of that. Can Denmark defend itself? Well, absolutely. It cannot. That's something that we all know, and we have to be honest about that. But there are specific interests that the United States has in acquiring Greenland. And if Greenland, if there's an opportunity for the United States to purchase that that territory, then I do believe that the United States should absolutely take forward. But again, we're not concerned, or we have no interest in being lectured by our European allies as far as what Americans' interests should be. We support our president of the United States.
Okay.
That's why he's the president of the United States.
Let me bring in Ashok Sajanar, because, who's lecturing who, who's advising who, who's threatening whom. All of these are questions that, depending on which side, you'll get different answers. But the fact is this: as per the 51 agreement, US cannot move without Denmark's consent. And it's somehow irritating them, or, it's unnerving them that Denmark is just not budging, nor is Greenland. Ashok Sajanar, that's the reality of what's happening.
Yeah, you're very right, Madhav. Thank you very much for having me. A couple of points, if you permit me to make. Number one, one comment was made that use of force can be taken off the table. I don't think with Mr. Trump in the White House, anything can be taken off the table. He is very prone to change his mind. In the morning, he might say something. In the evening, he'll say something 180 degrees, diametrically opposite. So, nothing is off the table. He said, I can use force, but I don't want to use force. But, this wanting could very well change. The other point is, when it is said that the Russians and the Chinese are conducting exercises there. I was ambassador in Sweden. I know that NATO is also conducting exercises. It's not only that the Chinese and the Russians are conducting exercises.
There you go.
Thirdly, the Greenland, the foreign minister of Greenland and the foreign minister of Denmark, they said for the last 10 years, we have not sighted a Chinese warship in those areas, in those regions. So, all this thing that Russian and Chinese ships are swarming over, I don't think there is any factual accuracy. They are just sort of, projected so as to make this case strong, but I don't think anyone is buying it. The last point is, as far as NATO is concerned, when the United States comes in, if it has to defend, if it has to put more troops, more boots on the ground in Greenland, it's a part of its responsibility. It signed this NATO agreement. It's a part of the NATO treaty. So, it's not doing anyone any favor by doing this, meaning if it has problem, you can renegotiate on this. And the last point here is that if Mr. Trump wants to put more troops on Greenland, that's what the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, and the Prime Minister of Greenland, Mr. Nielsen, both of them have said, we are willing to talk, we are willing to discuss.
Right.
Short of sovereignty, giving over sovereignty, everything else they are willing to talk and discuss.
Right.
So I think here there is this keenness, and I think, as Bruno Mackay said, basically his eye, like in Venezuela, it was on oil. Here it is on rare earths. And that is what he wants from there.
No, sure, there's a fight for rare earths happening. But before I go across to Kushal Mehra, Kushal, thank you for your patience. I'm just going to come to you in a minute. I want Dave Brad to answer those few questions. A, here's somebody who's been ambassador of India to Sweden. He says it's not like NATO doesn't do its exercises there. That also happens. And B, this kind of hyperbole that, Russian and Chinese ships and submarines are swarming the entire Arctic Circle, that's highly exaggerated as well. That's number one. And number two, Dave, I want you to respond to what Howard Lutnick is today saying. Today he says globalization has failed. US is the one that has to dictate a world policy, so on and so forth. But the so-called post-World War II liberal world order, the terms were completely dictated by the United States. You can't turn around, 60, 70 years later and say, look here, things have changed. Now you have to dance to another tune.
Yeah, no, my reaction is, the U.S. is looking out for America first. We're looking out the other panelists, if they want to speak on behalf of certain countries, that's great. But they don't seem to be taking in the full weight of what's happening up north right now. I just read the nuclear bastion strategy. Russia bases approximately 2/3 of its second strike nuclear capacity on the Kola Peninsula. Go look it up. Go Google it. Go to Google Earth and check it out. This includes 6 nuclear-armed submarines in the Northern Fleet, which must transit the GI-UK gap, Greenland, Iceland, UK to reach the Atlantic. That's a key strategic issue. China's Polar Silk Road. China identifies as a near Arctic state and seeks a Polar Silk Road to normalize its presence in future influence. And I could go on and on and on for sheets about all the detail. And so the folks on your panel are just skimming over these light little nuclear details that do pertain to our sovereignty. I'd refer them again to our U.S. strategic plan, which is out. It's only 30 pages. People can refer to that. On the sovereignty issue, everyone's using hyperbolic language. One of the guests just said the attacks are off the table, and then he changes his mind. Okay, so it's getting a little too personal. Our strategic interests are at risk, and
it's a fact that he changed his mind on EU. He said that EU agreed to a whole lot of concessions, got a lower tariff, and now 6 months later he's turned around on EU and he's threatening higher tariffs. So it is a fact that Trump has changed his mind, sir.
Well, this issue is a new issue. I said before, he was just starting off with the fact that all the G20 countries, the rich countries, had 200 to 300% higher tariffs on us than we had on them. These are our friends. We set up the post-World War II Bretton Woods liberal order. We funded the whole shooting match. We did the World Bank, the IMF, all of it. We set up all these international institutions for peace, et cetera. But then Europe was shirking on its responsibilities. And so President Trump is just going around the horn on our strategic interests called hemispheric dominance. That's the statement that's out there. Everybody ought to go read it and then get out your globe and look up north and see what's going on. This is serious business. And so he's going in with all the chips hard, and he's going to negotiate something that's good for everybody. Everyone's making very pithy moral statements. The United States has done the most good, right? Where the West, the Christian West, originated human rights language, private property rights, economic growth started with old Adam Smith up there in Scotland. Everybody likes to copy that cookbook. And so we've been a net positive by far for this globe. I don't think it's right for people to be lecturing the United States of America.
After spreading your multinational corporations globally, you can't suddenly turn around and say, look, your globalization has failed. That's completely defeating your own argument that you've made up until now.
No, it's not. I just said you shouldn't be questioning United States foreign policy when we've looked out for the best interests. There's no evidence that we're not looking out for the best interest just because people don't like the strategy personally or per country. What's Europe doing with China right now? What's their containment policy? How's the Russia thing going? Right? How's Europe doing on any of that? So, I mean, you got to be kidding me. Who else is doing good for the world in a powerful way? They're not. They can't.
Well, if you define this as doing good, then I really don't know what good is. But Kushal Mehra, I want you to respond to that because, what Mark Carney said very clearly that, as far as the middle countries, if they're not at the table, they're going to be at the menu. Again, Trump responding to that and asking Mark Carney to remember, what the role as far as Canada is, and it survives because of the United States. So is that really a definition of doing good to the rest of the world?
Good evening, Madhav, and good evening to everyone else. Morning to the folks in America. Well, Donald Trump is just saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, Mark Carney's speech was very good, but honestly, it was an admission that, we kind of worked with what was going on until it was in our favor, but now it's not kind of working for us, so we need to change our plans. That honestly was the case. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, I mean, he's just, like I said, he's saying the quiet part out loud. We're the hyperpower. You guys are dependent on us. Now I don't like what was happening before, so we changed the rules of the game. Is it nice? No. But actually, what was said just before me was actually true. If you read the 2025 national security document, it's just 30 pages. I did read it, actually. And the Americans were very clear about all these things. It's just that nobody took them seriously. And now that they're doing it, everybody is in panic mode because what happens is usually you assume that everything is going to be under bureaucratic lag. But with Donald Trump, it's just one person calling the shots. So, he gets up in the morning and he decides he wants to do something and he's really pushing through it. Now the thing is, if we go by those 30 pages, this is the end game. And Prime Minister Carney is actually in a unique kind of a problem because Canada is completely dependent on America. I think 75% of my trade, and please correct me if I'm wrong, 75% of Canadian trade is actually with the United States of America. Now that obviously that interdependence goes both ways, because Canada is also one of the biggest customers of America. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. But if you ask me honestly, at this point of time, did any Canadian wake up and think that this was going to be on their problem solving table? They would have said no a year ago, but now we are where we are. And also people need to recognize the fact that this is now the midterm year, and a lot of rhetoric that is also coming out of President Trump should be taken into that perspective also, because there is a midterm that is coming up. And I think if you analyze the speech today, I think 90% of the speech was to American public. It was not to the global public, to be very honest. For example, Prime Minister Carney was speaking to the rest of the world. He was not addressing Canadians. But President Trump was clearly talking to Americans. He was not talking to the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there were
He was talking about various governors, the domestic issues, interest rates, etc., which, when you would wonder why he would do that at a forum such as the World Economic Forum. Sierra Claire, is this President Trump under pressure? Is this the pressure of the midterm polls that's showing on President Trump?
Well, I think that President Trump, when he came to the World Economic Forum right before he left, he said, you will be well represented, speaking to the American people. And so that's always his goal, is to, do what's good for America. And so I think that that's what we're seeing. If there's any pressure on him, that's the pressure he feels, is to do what's good for America. And he mentioned also in his speech, that he cares very much about Europe and he wants to see them succeed as well. So I wouldn't say that is something that's driven by the midterms. That wouldn't have any effect on the midterms, but but he does. That's his first priority, is to do what's best for America, and he may be feeling the pressure to try to get some of these deals done with the Europeans and other places. But I don't know that it's politically driven. I think it's driven by the fact that he feels that that's his duty.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Ashok Sajaner on that note. Ashok Sajaner, a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, when Greenland was referred to, nobody took that very seriously. Nobody thought this sort of a situation would actually happen. But with Trump now talking about Diego Garcia, is that also on the radar of the US now? Because that's clearly within India's ambit as well, as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, an area where China has been trying to build up its own influence, and India also has huge stakes here.
No, absolutely. You're very right. It very well could be. You're very right that no one had taken him seriously. And, what we've seen as far as Canada, Panama Canal, and Diego Garcia, Chagos Island, etc., it could very well be, because unpredictability is, as I mentioned earlier, I think is one of his, Mr. Trump's middle names. So, he can flip-flop from one end to the other quite quickly. But if you permit, let me make just 2 points very, very quickly. Number one, what is mentioned, that it is 30 pages, national security strategy, it's for everyone to see. Fine, it's for everyone to see, but it doesn't make it right. If he says that this is going to be hemispheric dominance, doesn't mean that he can go walk into independent sovereign countries and occupy them. Like the map that he has shown, in which Venezuela is a part of the United States. That does not, no national security strategy will give you the right to walk into, as you said very rightly, Madhav, walks into another country and say, now it is mine. I'm occupying. He's sort of, using the Venezuelan oil, not for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. He's using it, he's putting it into escrow accounts in Qatar, not even there. So, it is not doing well for them. The other point that was mentioned about the Chinese polar route, etc., there are 8 members of the Arctic Council. Out of them, 7 are NATO countries. Only one, that is Russia, is a non-NATO country. If you want to keep it out, you have all the votes there. You don't need to be sort of, one country cannot impose on you that you have this polar route and China wants to be a member. No, you can, the constitution of the Arctic Council is quite different. China can very easily be kept out by all these 7 members.
Right.
And, the last point that you made, Madhav, I think definitely that is a very worrisome point, because although he has said, Western hemispheric dominance is my objective, but it doesn't mean that other areas are off limits as far as he is concerned.
Absolutely, they've got bases all over the Middle East, so certainly it's not like they're only present in the Western Hemisphere when it comes to their military interests. But I want Dr. Dave Brad to answer all those questions. 7 of the 8 countries, as far as the Arctic Circle are concerned, are NATO countries, and just because you have it in your policy doesn't necessarily make it right. You have to go by the international rules-based order, something that everyone from Macron to others are talking about. If you constructed and were part of this rules-based order for several decades, you don't go about destroying it overnight, because that's a recipe for a lot of chaos.
Yes, well, one of the problems with a rules-based order are the elitists and the elitist leaders in the European governments, right? Part of the problem at Davos, and President Trump made reference to heading in the wrong direction, is it's not clear these people are representing their own people. Conservative movements are growing rapidly in about every single country you can name. And so when you've got Kissinger training in Klaus Schwab, and then corruption there, and then heading over to Fink, the head of BlackRock, the trillionaire group, in our country, the distribution of income and the elites, we don't have free market capitalism anymore. We've got corporatism. The American people are not satisfied with that. And so Europe has failed on that account. Our own country in the U.S. has not paid attention to its people. President Trump ran as a populist on behalf of the people. He's got 5% economic growth right now, 4.9% productivity growth, unheard of, propping up U.S. wages for the working class. And so we'll see what the end state here is. On these shows, everyone's criticized him. Oh, his tariffs are going to cause inflation. Nope. San Francisco Federal Reserve said nope. Short run, not at all. There's been all sorts of barbs put forward. I think the world will be surprised at the end of this year when they see what these negotiations yield. I think he's actually bringing clarity to international relations, which has been absent for way too long. The global elites, remember, were pushing this huge green initiative, which was basically a surtax going to the elites. Corruption all run amok. Now the big richies over here, the trillionaire class, need energy. So they got rid of the windmills and the sun stuff and the green energy. Now they all fly their jets into Davos on behalf of huge energy facilities for artificial intelligence, et cetera. Right. So none of that's been run by the people. The open border piece, 10 to 20 million illegals. Europe's not happy with that. The elites have skipped that. The elites are all for that. Cheap labor. The heads of corporations are for that. So
I have a
I'm
very,
not sure
very different
all the
perspective
panel
on
knows
that,
of
Dr.
those
Dave
issues,
Brad,
but
because
they're
there's the rest of the world, the real impact of climate change is being felt. You can't deny climate change, and you want to push back to thermal energy and so on and so forth. That's US's prerogative. But let's not deny the huge amount of impact it's having. Let me bring in fact, Ina Tangent. Ina Tangent, this repeated argument that it's global elites who benefit from these green laws and these green thoughts. The point is that there's some amount of denial over here. The pushback for thermal, the pushback for oil dependency, while that may be in US's strategic interest, you can't deny the kind of environmental havoc and damage that it can potentially cause in coming years.
Well, we saw that very clearly at COP30. The U.S. was not present, and Europe said, well, in the developing world, you should stop developing. That will help the global climate change. These are kind of nonsensical arguments. It's kind of like when Donald Trump said that there are no windmills in China. In fact, the largest windmill farm in the world is in Gansu, China. I've seen pictures of it. It would be very hard to miss, even with satellites, which obviously can read whether you shined your shoes today or not. So, I mean, this is just typical Donald Trump. But you have to ask yourself why. Since things have begun with Venezuela taking the president and his wife, and all of the rest of these absurd claims, lies, etc., there has been no mention in the press of the Epstein files, the fact that MAGA in his base is fracturing because he's overseas looking after no one knows what, but certainly not looking after Americans. And despite my colleague's assertion that America's doing great, the fact is that over 50% of America are one crisis away from homelessness. The number of middle-class people has shrunk from in 1970s from 61% to 40% in 2024. Yes, there are some upper middle class, but this whole discussion is fatuous. And the reason I say that is the United States has the ability to have bases to put in early warning systems. They have the right and the duty to protect Greenland as part of NATO. So all of this stuff about we're asserting ourselves, we're ending clarity, it's all nonsense. This is just the old story of one country with might deciding that they are right.
Right. One country with might deciding that whatever they're doing is right. Malik Abdul, respond to that charge that this is all. One, of course, is the point that he's pressed for the midterm polls, but the other is that he's really embarrassed by abstain and is trying to change the entire narrative at this point of time. Respond to that, Malik Abdul.
Well, I've talked to people close to the White House, and and you're right, the person who mentioned that a majority of the speech here was geared towards a domestic audience here in the United States. That was the goal in the first place, because Donald Trump just completed his full year of being president of the United States. And so he will, in the next few weeks, continue to reference the successes that he's had in his first year. Many of those around immigration, around the economy, around a number of things that Donald Trump is doing. These were the things that he was intending to focus on. So yes, to an extent, this is some sort of messaging for the midterm, because Donald Trump was supposed to start talking more about the economy. That's exactly what he did. But many of the things and the concerns that he's even had in his first term around NATO and a lot of the pushback that we're seeing now is similar to what we saw in the first administration. Donald Trump wanted our NATO allies to start spending more as far as the defense spending. Now we know that there's an agreement because of the work that Donald Trump did to actually push our allies to actually start. I think there's going to be about a 5% increase in defense spending by 2034. This is, again, something else that other presidents of the United States hadn't focused on, and Donald Trump has. There's a lot of not just strategic interests that Donald Trump has on the global front, but again, a lot of these things at home. No, and I'll say no one is in favor, and there's no poll to suggest that Americans are in favor of the United States invading and taking over Greenland. That's not on the table at all. But if you ask the same question, should the United States purchase Greenland, then you have different concerns. America actually is doing, and I definitely disagree with my colleague on the panel, America, when you look at the actual numbers of where America is, even starting with Donald Trump starting with his tariffs, of many of the things that he wanted to do around his tariffs, America is now in a much better place, not just with negotiating tariffs, making sure that we're leveling out on a level playing field with what we're spending as far as what other countries around the world. America, when you look at consumer confidence, when you look at the job market, when you look at our inflation numbers, all of those numbers are doing very well. So the suggestion that somehow America is not doing well is just ridiculous, and I understand.
Well, I'm not going to get into whether America is doing well or not, but I will. All right, Dr. Bruno wants to respond to you. Dr. Bruno, respond to that, and also the point that President Trump makes when he says that Europe is headed in the wrong direction, not just in terms of what they're doing vis-a-vis NATO and the United States, but overall. When he sees the kind of countries, he says it's changed, it's not going in the right direction. That's the feedback he constantly gets. Your response to that quickly, Dr. Bruno.
It's none of his business. It's none of his business. We're democracies. We run ourselves. By the way, I'm polite enough not to come here and start talking about the dismal state of American cities that I visit and I don't recognize from my visits 20, 30 years ago. But I'm polite enough not to do that. And the American president should be even more polite and not get involved in issues that are none of his competence. He's not president of any European country. Now, listening to my American friend, David, I feel I'm listening to one of the people around Vladimir Putin, because it's exactly the same argument. Putin and the people around him had made clear that they need Crimea for national security purposes. And apparently it doesn't matter if a country is independent, sovereign. What matters if it's a country with enough power thinks that it's necessary to occupy sovereign territory for its own national security purposes. That's obviously unacceptable. Denmark and Greenland have said repeatedly that Greenland is not for sale. The Danish government has said, we trade with people. We don't trade people. You don't sell people. You don't sell 60,000 people to the highest bidder. Let me just, because maybe it's my last time speaking, I want to commend the Indian government and Indian authorities for standing up to Donald Trump. I've said many times, I wish the European Union did the same in the same terms. And I hope it will now, because I sense a completely different mood in Brussels and European capitals. But basically, the way I see it, Prime Minister Modi heard from Donald Trump that Trump wanted to destroy the Indian farm sector, and he wanted to internationalize the Kashmir issue, and he just said no. Because
and I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because you have now a situation where even Ursula von der Leyen is coming out to say that, the biggest trade deal that perhaps the EU will be doing is with India. And it's not just a trade deal. There's also talk about a strategic alliance over there and a strategic partnership that will formally be signed in perhaps a few weeks from now. We'll have to leave it there. Ashok Sajanar, Kushal Mehra, Dr. Bruno Mackayes, Ina Tangent, Dr. Dave Brad, Melik Abdul, Sierra Claire. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.